Thank you. You might want to add to that 20 years in the private sector. I worked in SAIC in the private sector to the day I was sworn into this job. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I will begin recognizing the humility of being a House member here in the Senate, this august body. I used to work here, and I was reminded about Virginia and humility. I was invited to give a speech when my daughter was in the 5th grade about the differences between federal, state, and local government. Ladies and gentlemen, I gave a stem winder of a speech to that 5th grade. I talked about the delicate balance between the provision of services and taxation in local government. I talked about the Dillon Rule. I talked about the growing divide between Nova and the rest of Virginia, and I wound up with great panache. And I want you to know I got very polite applause from that 5th grade. With one exception. There was one little girl with her arms akimbo and a big scowl on her face. And I went up to her with my daughter and I said, you didn't like my remarks? She said, no, I thought they were boring. My daughter could see the stricken look on my face, and to comfort me, she came running up saying, oh, Dad, don't listen to her. She just repeats what everyone else says. So we know our place as House members here in the Senate. Just wanted to share a few things with you. First of all of us have to acknowledge, irrespective of our philosophy of government or our partisan predilection, the federal government is key to the economy of Virginia. There is no escaping that. Almost a third of our state GDP is directly or indirectly tied to the posture of the federal government in investments, direct spending, indirect spending. And frankly, you could kind of primitively divide Virginia's economy in that relationship between military and defense-related direct expenditures and outsourcing, contracting of services. And although we always think of the military one being dominant, I would just remind this audience, there is a huge footprint in the civilian sector in Virginia. In my district, 45% of federal spending is in the civilian sector. So when we talk about sequestration and let's at least lift defense and put more pressure, downward pressure on civilian, it affects a lot of jobs, a lot of companies, including small businesses that provide critical services to the federal government. And that will become even more true as we look at the role of cybersecurity because, again, that plays to a Virginia strength. So we have an agenda, Democrats and Republicans, to mitigate damage done. And we see damage when we shut down the federal government. We see damage when there's sequestration. And we see it reflected in macroeconomic performance at the state level in terms of job creation, GDP, incomes, growth overall. And we fell behind the country in the recovery from the recession in large part because of this dampening effect of the federal government. So I always say to my conservative friends, don't get too carried away here in Virginia with shrinking the size of the federal government. Let's do it prudently. Let's do it in a targeted way, but much damage can be done in the process, and it will affect both the direct defense spending economy of Virginia and the outsourcing federal contracting part of Virginia, which is equally important. Trade. Most of us in the Virginia delegation are free traders. And for those of us who are Democrats, it costs us. The 3 Democrats running in Northern Virginia, for example, on the ballot this past November 8th, not one of them was endorsed by the AFL-CIO. They withheld their endorsement because of our position on trade. So I say to this business community, please remember that. And we're proud of that support for trade, and I'd vote for it again. But trade is dead. Free trade right now is dead in this city. and you should have no illusion about it. When you have both nominees, one renouncing an agreement she called kind of the gold standard of trade, and the other who talked about ripping up all trade agreements, and TPP being maybe, in his view, the worst trade agreement ever negotiated, ever. Even if our leadership wanted quietly in the dead of night on both sides to bring up free trade, TPP, they're not going to be able to do it. And so it's going to require enormous lifting in the new administration and the new Congress, frankly, to even reconsider the issue. And that's tragic for America. And I will tell you, as somebody who's on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, as my good friend Tim Kaine is on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where I used to work, we're retreating in Asia, and the happiest people on the planet are the Chinese, because they're going to walk into that vacuum. And many of the critics of trade have a point, but they've decided to make trade the boogeyman. And frankly, the great disruptor is not trade, it's technology. What are you going to do, fight technology? Let's ban it. Anyway, it's a very frustrating thing, and we're going to have to collaborate on both sides of the aisle with you, with the business community, to figure this out. But I can tell you there's no revival of this anytime soon. Tax reform. It's the buzzword, and I'm here to, I favor it too, I guess. But tax reform is always more attractive in the abstract than it is in the particular. Example, don't you want to make the tax code fairer and reduce the burden and make our corporate tax rate more competitive? Absolutely. Who doesn't? Of course. Okay, now let's look at the top 10 tax expenditures in the tax code. Stop me when there's one you want to vote to get rid of. You know, mortgage interest deduction. Well, we can't do that. The real estate industry wouldn't like it, homeowners wouldn't like it, it would have devastating impact on many communities, so we're not going to do that. Well, that's number 3, I think. You know, how employers get favorable tax credit providing health insurance to their employees, biggie, it's in the top 3. Well, we don't want to do that. Well, all right, favorable treatment for 401ks and pensions. You see the pattern. The top 10 tax expenditures are virtually all middle-class designed tax expenditures, and they're big dollars. So if you really want reform, you're going to have to go after those, and you're going to step on a lot of toes, and I'm here to tell you, a lot of politicians are going to peel away from that when they see what it means. Frankly, so is the public. So we can get excited about tax reform, and there are some aspects of tax reform that may yet fly. The president-elect has said he wants to collapse the 7 tax rates into 3. Here's the problem with the rates he's proposed, which may initially be attractive to many of us in this audience. It lowers those tax rates for all of us. The highest tax rate would become 33%, but the Tax Foundation says if we do that, there's a loss in revenue of between $4.5 and $6 trillion over 10 years. Now, added to everything else, that kind of would, I think, have a big impact on us in Virginia. So we got to look at that. We got to be careful about how we do it. We can't mindlessly just be excited about tax reform and tax cuts without understanding the consequences. Doesn't mean we can mindlessly be in favor of them either. So we're going to have some interesting agendas. Infrastructure is one of them. God knows we all love the word infrastructure and infrastructure investment. How you do it is key. And as somebody who came from local government, as you indicated, I've had a lot of experience in how you do it, and that matters too. So it's going to be a very interesting time. Stay tuned. I think it's going to be a bit of a wild ride, and I don't know that any of us can accurately predict the ups and downs of that wild ride, but we're going to be here working with you to try to collectively and on a bipartisan basis protect Virginia's interests no matter what happens. Thank you so much.